And hello, my fabulous students. This is your favorite teacher, Mr. Jacobson. I'm excited to be with you today. Today we're talking about the development of state and empire. There's a lot going on around the world around 600 BCE to 600 CE in that 1,000 years. And we're going to see a lot of states, meaning empires and statehoods, coming and going. And we're going to analyze a little bit of why that is. Let us begin. So here's a map of the timeline, and you can see we have a lot of different empires and civilizations in the mix here, from the Greeks. When we go further down, you got the Peloponnesian War, you got the Alexander the Great, you got the Marians, the Qin, the Han, all the way down to the collapse of the Roman Empire. So go ahead and take a while to process that. So the key states and empires that I want you to keep in mind here. In Southwest Asia, we have the Persian empires. Easy peasy. East Asia, we have both the Qin and the Han dynasties. The Qin dynasty is pretty short-lived, and we'll explain a little bit as to why. South Asia, we have the Mauryan and the Gupta empires, which would be around modern-day India. In the Mediterranean region, we have the Phoenician and its colonies, we have Greek city-states, we have Hellenistic and Roman empires, so a lot's happening around the Mediterranean at this time. In Mesoamerica, we got the famous Teotihuacan, and of course the Mayan city-states, and then we have the Andean in South America, known as the Moche. So I want you to keep in mind about two different attitudes towards government. One is centralized, meaning state authority rests in the hands of a powerful bureaucracy in a central location. It could even rest in the hands of one person. And then decentralized would be a form of government that its top-level decisions-making process dispersed throughout the system rather than concentrated in one person, place, or legislative body. So here we have those who would fall under centralized government. Roman Empire would be centralized government. Roman Republic would have been decentralized. But as it was an empire, it was centralized. And under decentralization, we have the Persian and the Gupta. So centralized government. One of the most famous examples of centralized government during this time period is the Qin dynasty in China. The Emperor Qin Shi Huangdi, this is him right here. Looks like a nice looking guy, I'm sure. He followed a philosophy called legalism, Chinese legalism. And this philosophy was that humans were inherently bad, and that we will always choose to do the wrong thing or the evil thing, and the only way to keep humans in line would be to implement strict laws with harsh, severe punishments. And the more severe the punishments, the more in line the humans will be to adhere and do the right thing. So he was a strong legalist, and he ruled with what you would call an iron fist. His empire is short-lived because people don't typically like to be ruled that way. So the Han dynasty comes into play. The Han dynasty had a different approach. They had this massive government system called the Civil Service Examination. And what this meant is that they would actually have an examination when people would become at adult age, and they would take this examination. And if they passed this really hard, crazy, stressful test, they could actually go into levels of government. And if they could go into government, that meant that they could move up in a class and be in a higher tier on the social hierarchy within the Han dynasty. And this examination, it was something that kids prepared for their whole lives. Parents would buy tutors for them just to prepare them for that one chance of them taking that one test as they emerge into adulthood and it would determine the very fate of their lives. No pressure, by the way. Then we have Rome, who was also a centralized government when they became an empire. And then we also have the Mauryan Empire as well. Now, if you go decentralized, the Persian Empire is famous for because the Persian king, he realized that you can't manage a massive empire like the Persian Empire with one person. You just eventually just couldn't do it. You couldn't keep it together. But what if you broke up your empire into provinces, or satrapies is what they called them, and each satrapies was ruled by a satrap, or we would call it governor. So the Persian Empire famously decentralized. The Persian Empire gave governed peoples considerable autonomy. As long as they paid their taxes and tribute, the king was happy. If the satrap, the governor, was able to keep people in line, stop rebellions, and give the king his due taxes, then that governor was left alone for the most part because he was doing a great job. If they don't do it, then the king would step in, possibly kill the governor, and then put in somebody else. And then the Gupta, they were also decentralized, and there's a lot of good things and bad things that come with decentralizing. One thing the Gupta Empire kind of struggled with was having really good workable roads, because again, everything was broken up into provinces. They didn't have one person at the top saying, this is how we're going to do all the roads, and we're going to keep them maintained and everything once a year. So there are goods and bads that come with it, but the autonomy is definitely a plus for those who are being governed. So we have a few techniques that are coming about as large empires are starting to form. One, we have diplomacy. Diplomacy is this attitude of, hey, why do we always have to fight? Can we work out agreements without fighting? Another one is development of supply lines. It costs a lot of money to try to keep all those armies to protect your empire. We got the building of defensive walls and roads, and then we also have military officers and soldiers who are also being acquired into a much larger empire. So diplomacy. The Han tried to buy the loyalty of the leaders of the Xiongnu. They're the people who were north of China. They are the nomadic people. They were looked at as, kind of like heathens, less civilized, but they kept crouching into the Han dynasty, and they didn't like that, so eventually they tried to strike a deal, if you will. The Guptas, they allowed defeated kings to remain in power as long as they paid tribute to the Gupta Empire, as I talked about with you earlier. So, government and trade. These are the famous capitals you need to know. You need to know about Persepolis, Shangan, Pataliputra, Athens, Carthage, Rome, Alexandria, Constantinople, and at the very end here, this is pronounced Teotihuacan. So here you can kind of see the famous trade routes that are happening during this time period. You have a lot of water trade happening over in this area all the way to China and to India. You have the famous Silk Road, which is here, that ends right over here in the Middle East. And then you have the salt and gold trade, which we'll have to talk about later. So food and production. So with a huge empire, you need food and production. One form was corvée. This was a form of coerced forced labor required in the place of taxes. Emperor Qin Shi Huangdi, the legalist, he required 2 months of unpaid labor from his subjects every year. So he is requiring 2 months of your precious year to dedicate to unpaid forced labor. Another one is slavery, which the Greeks, Romans, Gupta, Mayans, all of them were really big. In fact, the Greeks at some points even got overturned by slaves, and it took a lot of work to try to restore order because there were so many slaves that they easily outnumbered the actual citizens of Greek society. You have the rents and tributes. So you have landowning elites. And they could charge rent for small non-slave farmers. And again, emperors and kings would often require tribute, so that was a great way for them to get some. You have peasant communities and family and household productions, which you can read about. Environmental effects. So we have one, deforestation. That's pretty serious. It's when you just cut down too many trees to the point where they're not growing back, and you don't have the resources of wood, which is very important in an empire, and also the resources that come with forestation. You have desertification, where you have irrigated fields are being worked too hard, and as they're worked too hard and the intensity on that land increases, slowly that land stops producing green and then reverts back to desert. You have soil erosion. If you have overgrazing, you don't have a lot of plants, and if you don't have a lot of plants, then the wind can carry off the topsoil, and the topsoil is so important for the nutrients of vegetation that it's a pretty serious thing when there's soil erosion. And then lastly, you have salinization, and this is what happens when you have salinization. It's unfortunate. You have excess salt that starts to creep into the ground, and if there's more salt, then it makes it harder for crops to take up the water. And then we have external problems. We have empires and kingdoms that are struggling because we have border problems. I mentioned earlier Han China and the Xiongnu. They are at odds with each other, and there have been alliances who are struck up for them to say, hey, you stay in your area, we'll stay in your area, let's leave each other alone. For a while, the Xiongnu even had to give tribute to the Han dynasty, and they would even make like bribery and marriage alliances. The cost of maintaining security along that western frontier Silk Road, which was such a high point for trade and for money, that the Han dynasty was constantly trying to keep it safe, and the Xiongnu were constantly encroaching on that. We had the Gupta and the White Huns, a nomadic confederation from Central Asia. The White Huns conquered most of the Gupta Empire by 500 CE. They invaded India from the northwest through the Khyber Pass, like the Aryan invasion prior to them. And then we have the Romans and Germanic warriors. So the Germanic warriors, who were pretty much all around Rome, they slowly started encroaching in. You have the Ostrogoths, you have the Visigoths, the Vandals, and as Rome kept getting weaker, they kept kind of squeezing in to the Roman boundaries, and eventually Rome was sacked by the Visigoths, and then later by the Vandals. And that's pretty much it. So go ahead and write your one-page summary, and I look forward to talking to you about this at the end of at the beginning of our next class session. Thank you.